They clapped when they said his name. Mr. Bernard Elliott. A teacher so beloved, he made the list of most influential educators at our 70th high school reunion. And I just sat there. Because I knew something they didn't. Or maybe something they didn't want to remember. My name is Edith May Harper. I'm 83 now, and for nearly 7 decades, I kept one secret locked away, buried beneath polite silence and the smell of chalk dust. But the day I saw his face again in a photo, I thought I'd forgotten my knees buckled. Because I remembered everything. Have you ever carried a memory so heavy it changed your whole life? Yet no one else even noticed. If this story stirs something in you, I hope you'll share your thoughts. Maybe it's time we all remembered. I hadn't heard from anyone from Millgrove in decades until the letter showed up by my door. It was a plain ivory envelope, no return address, just my name and handwriting I didn't recognize. I thought at first it must be a church flyer or another donation appeal. But when I picked it up, I noticed the weight heavier than junk mail. It had presence. And the paper had a smell. Faintly of chalk dust, old hallways, and autumn leaves soaked in sunlight. I stood there in my front hall, still in my housecoat, the morning radio humming from the kitchen about weather and world news, none of it urgent enough to distract me. My tea had gone cold on the counter. The envelope demanded something of me, and I hadn't even opened it. The return address finally caught my eye. Millgrove Alumni Association, Ohio. The year on the postmark was right. The sender was real. I hadn't lived in Millgrove since 1955. I didn't sit down to open it. I stood there by the door, one hand on the knob, the other tearing gently at the sealed edge, like peeling back something sacred and dangerous. Inside was a single card, cream-colored. Gold embossing around the edges. You are cordially invited to the 70th class reunion for Millgrove High School class of 1955. November 4th, 2023, Millgrove Auditorium. And below in soft cursive script, we hope you'll come share your memories. Some stories are never too late to tell. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe long enough for the kettle to cool again. Maybe long enough for the shadows in the front room to change angles. Jacob came by that afternoon with groceries. Ma, he called the way he always did, like I might have gone out dancing or something. I'm in here, I said, folding the invitation and slipping it back into its envelope before he came into the kitchen. He looked tired, he always did now with 2 kids and a job that expected too much. But he smiled when he saw me and kissed the top of my head. What's that? He asked, nodding toward the envelope I'd just tucked beneath the teapot. Nothing important, I said too quickly. He raised an eyebrow. Was that from Ohio? Thought I saw the postmark? Might have been. Something from the school. Just a reunion notice. He reached across me to grab a mug from the cupboard. Wow, you gonna go? Could be fun. I've never seen where you grew up. I shook my head, trying to busy myself with the tea bags. It's been a long time. No one I really need to see. He didn't press. He rarely did. He knew when not to push. Later that night, after he'd gone, and the house slipped back into its stillness, I sat in the chair by the window, the one with the Afghan I knitted during Henry's chemo. Outside, the maple leaves were starting to turn. Not quite red yet, but enough to glow orange in the late light. I pulled the wooden box from the drawer under the side table, the one with the brass clasp and the little squeak when it opened. I hadn't opened it in years, maybe decades. Inside were a few yellowed programs from recitals, a pressed violet from my wedding bouquet, and a black and white photograph. 9th grade, homeroom class, me third from the left hair in tight curls. Dorothy Barnes beside me laughing mid-snap. And there in the center behind us all stood Mr. Bernard Elliott. His smile was exactly as I remembered. Warm, approachable, slightly crooked as if he were forever just beginning a joke. He wore that same brown wool jacket with the elbow patches, and his hands were tucked neatly behind his back. I felt something strike in my chest. Not a pang, not a flutter. A thump deep and sudden. A pulse of something old and raw, and still there buried so carefully for so long, I'd almost convinced myself it had never happened. I set the photo down. My hands had started to shake. I pressed my fingers to my lips and closed my eyes. I hadn't thought about Bernard Elliott in 68 years, but the moment I saw his smile again, I couldn't breathe. We all thought he was the kindest man at Millgrove High. Maybe he was, until he wasn't. It was the first day of 9th grade, and the leaves in Millgrove had just started to turn. A slow, golden hush had fallen over the sidewalks, the kind that only comes with early autumn in Ohio. The kind of quiet that makes you think the world is pausing to listen. Millgrove Public High was made of red brick tall windows and time-worn steps that creaked in the mornings. That day, I wore my brown plaid skirt and a cream blouse with buttons shaped like tiny daisies. Mama had braided my hair too tight and tucked a new pencil into the front of my book bag. "You're going to do just fine," she'd said. I didn't feel fine. I never did on the first day. I was the kind of girl who read poetry at lunch and turned in homework early. The kind of girl who sat near the back, but not all the way trying to disappear without looking like I was trying. Dorothy, on the other hand, burst into the classroom like she owned the place. "You'd think we were getting married the way Mama fussed over my hair," she whispered, rolling her eyes, then smiled at me. "You nervous?" I nodded, clutching my notebook to my chest. "You'll be fine." I piqued Mr. Elliott's our English teacher, and let me tell you, he's not like the others. Younger, handsome too. She wiggled her brows and slid into the desk beside mine. That was the first time I saw him. He walked in carrying a stack of books and a thermos tucked beneath his arm. Mr. Bernard Elliott. His hair was neatly combed, not too short, and he had this calm way of looking around the room like he was meeting us one by one, not just scanning. He smiled when we looked back. "Good morning, class," he said. His voice was low but warm, like the inside of a church on a snowy day. "My name is Mr. Elliott, and I'll be guiding you through the world of literature this year." He didn't say teaching, he said guiding, and somehow that made it sound important. By the end of the first week, I was already writing more than the assignments asked for. One day, he had us write a one-page essay about what home feels like. I wrote 3. He returned mine with a small note in red ink. "See me after class. I'd like to talk about your work." I remember staring at that sentence so long, the words lost shape. When the bell rang, I stayed seated, hands damp with nerves. Dorothy raised her brows and grinned. "Ooh, the teacher wants a word. Looks like we've got a genius in our midst," she teased before bouncing out the door. The classroom emptied. I sat still. Mr. Elliott walked over and leaned one hand on the desk in front of me. "Edith Wright." I nodded. "Your essay. It was beautifully written." "Really? You have something rare, Edith. Not just talent, but vision. Have you ever thought of submitting your work to contests? Maybe even a literary journal?" "No, sir." "Well, I think we should explore that." He smiled not wide, just enough to feel like a secret. "Would you be open to staying after school once or twice a week? Nothing formal, I'd just like to help you develop your voice. I think you could go far if you want to." My heart thudded in my chest. No teacher had ever said that before. Most barely remembered my name, let alone talked about vision. I nodded slowly. "Okay." He reached into his desk and pulled out a slim folder. "We can start next Tuesday. Just bring whatever you like to write. Poetry, short stories. Anything." Then he handed me back my essay. His fingers brushed mine. I told myself it was just an accident, a paper slip, nothing at all. But it lingered. Only for a moment. Maybe not even that long. But long enough that I noticed. I didn't say anything. As I walked out of the room, I turned the corner and nearly bumped into Dorothy, who'd clearly been waiting. So she asked, "He wants to help me. With writing." "Ooh," she said again. "Looks like someone's about to be the teacher's little literary star." I laughed half-hearted, but my face was warm. That afternoon, the sun shone through the windows like honey, and the smell of chalk dust clung to the hallway walls. I clutched the folder he'd given me, not knowing that it would change everything. Not yet. For a while, staying after school felt like a secret only he and I shared. The kind of secret that made me feel chosen, special. At 14, special is a powerful drug. It began simply. Tuesday afternoons, just the two of us in room 203. At first, it really was just writing. He gave me prompts to stretch my imagination. Once he handed me a photograph of a girl on a swing and said, "Give her a secret." Another time, a poem by Dickinson. "I'm nobody, who are you?" and asked me what I thought it meant to disappear. I remember the first time he gave me the notebook. It was a small, leather-bound thing, burgundy, with my initials embossed on the front in gold. "For your real writing," he said. I touched the cover like it might disappear. "You bought this for me." He smiled, almost bashful. "I think every writer needs a private place. This is yours." I nodded, unsure what to say, but I cradled it like something sacred. I filled the pages quickly. Mostly poems, messy and too long, but they poured out of me in ways I hadn't known I needed. Sometimes about the girls in my class, sometimes about being invisible, sometimes about how Mr. Eliot's words made me feel heard. He started asking me questions. What did my parents do? Did they fight? Was I close to my mother? Did I have any real friends? At first, I answered easily. Then came questions that made me pause. Has anyone ever made you feel small? Has anyone ever made you feel beautiful? He always asked softly, never rushed, like he was giving me permission to tell truths I hadn't said out loud. I told myself he was just a good teacher, the best kind, the kind who noticed. I never noticed how the door was always locked. One Thursday, I came in with puffy eyes. 2 girls had cornered me by the lockers earlier that day, teasing me for being teacher's pet. One of them snapped the strap on my bag. I dropped all my books. He saw the redness in my face and didn't ask what happened. Instead, he stood behind me at my desk and placed a hand gently on my shoulder. "I see you, Edith," he said. "No one else does. Not really, but I do." I held still. The room was so quiet, I could hear the soft tick of the classroom clock. I don't know how long his hand stayed there, but when he finally stepped away, the warmth of his palm remained. By Halloween, the sessions had shifted. We still wrote, but he talked more about the world, about people who couldn't understand giftedness. He spoke about loneliness like it was a gift, something only the truly brilliant endured. "You don't belong with them," he told me once, after a group of students laughed at a pun I didn't get. "You think too deeply. That's not your fault, Edith. That's your gift." The more he said things like that, the more I believed them. He made me feel like my difference was something golden, worth hiding. After a while, he asked if I'd mind coming twice a week. I said yes before he even finished the question. One afternoon in early November, I arrived early and waited outside room 203. The door was locked. I sat on the floor cross-legged, rereading something I'd written about stars that couldn't be seen in daylight. When he finally arrived, I stood quickly apologizing for being early. He laughed softly. "Don't ever apologize for wanting more." Then he unlocked the door and let us in. Sometimes other teachers passed by, but no one said anything. Once the principal popped his head in and nodded. "You've got a bright one there," he said. Mr. Elliot just smiled. I began to stop telling my mother about the extra sessions. At first I'd mentioned them. She was proud she liked the idea of her daughter being noticed for her brain. But when she asked what we worked on, I didn't know how to answer. How could I explain that it wasn't assignments anymore? That sometimes we just talked. That sometimes he asked me how I felt about love. I started saying I had group tutoring or a library shift. She never questioned it. Secrets are sweet when you're young, until they rot from the inside. By Thanksgiving, I no longer waited for the bell to ring. I waited for everyone else to leave. She was in last year's photo, 2 desks behind me. But no one ever talked about Jenny again. It started with a book. Not just any book, but one I had borrowed from the school library for a poetry assignment, Leaves of Grass, the thick old copy bound in blue cloth with the spine half torn and pages soft from use. I found it tucked between newer volumes, forgotten, but not discarded. When I opened it that night in my room, the inside cover had a name scrawled faintly in pencil. Jenny Wilkes, room 203. Something stirred in me. I didn't know many girls older than me by name, but I recognized it Wilkes. She'd been in last year's class photo, standing in the back row, with her head tilted slightly, hair in a ribbon, eyes unreadable. I remembered her because Dorothy once said she vanished. "She moved away," Dorothy had whispered in that tone kids use when the truth feels too odd to say out loud. Suddenly, no goodbye, just gone. I turned the page. Scribbled faintly along the margin near a poem about longing was a note. J.W., Mr. E., 2s, 3s. I stared at those initials for a long time. They matched mine. That week in the library, I returned the book but didn't drop it in the bin. I walked it up to the desk where the librarian, Mrs. Cartwright, sat behind her thick glasses and teacup with a chipped saucer. "Did Jenny Wilkes used to check out a lot of poetry?" I asked too casually. Mrs. Cartwright paused, her hand still over the stamp pad. "Jenny," she repeated slowly. "She was quiet, smart girl, very polite. Do you know why she left?" She looked down. Her family moved suddenly. These things happen. I thanked her and left before she could ask why I cared. That afternoon, while Dorothy and I sat near the bleachers waiting for the late bus, I brought it up. "Hey," I said, "do you remember Jenny Wilkes?" Dorothy tilted her head. "Sure. Kind of quiet, but nice." She helped with the fall play backstage. "Why, I found her name in a book. Said something about Tuesdays and Thursdays." "Mr. E.?" Dorothy blinked, then looked away quickly. "Oh, I think she used to stay after school too." "Like you do." My breath caught. She did. Yeah. Everyone talked about it for a bit. How he was helping her with writing. Or maybe it was science, I don't know. Then one day, she wasn't at school anymore. Just gone. "Did anyone ask why?" Dorothy shrugged. "I guess people figured she moved. You know how grown-ups are. No one really tells us anything." But something in her voice told me she knew more than she was saying. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my math homework open, but untouched. My notebook, the one Mr. Elliot gave me, lay beside it. I opened it, flipping past my poems, past the pages about stars and loneliness, and words I thought were only mine. The first page had always had a faint smudge on the upper corner. I'd assumed it was dirt, but in the light of the kitchen lamp, I saw something different. It wasn't a smudge. It was handwriting, faint, almost erased, but there. Jenny. I traced the outline of the J with my finger heart pounding. I wasn't the first. The realization sat heavy in my chest. All this time, I had believed he saw something in me that was singular, unique, something no one else could understand. But now that feeling twisted into something sour. I wasn't alone. I was part of a pattern. The next day during lunch, I slipped into the library again. I asked Mrs. Cartwright if she had last year's yearbook. She handed it over without question. I flipped quickly through the pages until I found the sophomore class. Jenny Wilkes. Her eyes were soft, uncertain, as if she didn't want to be seen. But her name was there. And then it wasn't in the senior yearbook. No graduation, no club photo. Just gone. I sat in that quiet library, my hands trembling slightly on the glossy pages. If she'd left suddenly, if she'd stayed after school on the same days I did, if she'd written her name in a book he gave her. What did that mean about me? By the time the bell rang for fifth period, I hadn't moved. Because suddenly, I didn't feel so special. I felt replaceable. And I wasn't sure anymore if the attention I once craved was ever really meant for me at all. I wasn't the first. I just never asked what happened to the girls before me. The first time he locked the classroom door, I told myself it was for focus, for quiet. It was early December, and the cold had crept into the building through every crack and window. The radiators hissed and groaned, but never did enough. Room 203 smelled of chalk and metal desks and old coats. When I walked in that Tuesday, Mr. Elliot was already inside. The blinds were half drawn, and the light overhead flickered softly, casting shadows that seemed too long for a room that small. "Close the door, Edith," he said, not looking up from his folder. I did. He stood and walked over, then turned the bolt at the top. Click. "Just us," he said. "No distractions." I didn't know what to say, so I smiled and nodded like I understood. The room felt quieter than usual, still in a way that made every movement feel too loud. My chair scraped the floor. The pages of my notebook rustled. Even my breathing seemed to echo. I sat, and he began to speak about metaphor, about how words could bend reality. A writer doesn't just describe the world, Edith, he said. She recreates it. He looked at me in a way that made my hands go still. "You feel that, don't you? The weight of language." I nodded, because it was true. Then he leaned against the edge of the desk beside me. "You know," he said, his tone softer now, "I hear what people say about you, about staying behind. The whispers." My stomach tightened, but I also see what they don't. He continued. "Your strength, your vision. They laugh because they're small. You're not." I looked down. "They don't deserve your company, Edith." I didn't say anything, but something in me, some part still clinging to the hope of friendship, winced. He tilted his head, slightly, eyes warm. "They don't understand what it means to be set apart. But I do." He reached out, then slowly, as if not to startle me, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. "You have the heart of a writer," he said so softly I could barely hear it. "And one day, you'll be great if you trust me." Completely. Something fluttered inside me, a mix of pride and nausea. I didn't move. "I see you," he whispered. The light above flickered again. Once. Twice. Then steadied into a dim hum. For the next 40 minutes, we read a poem aloud, something by Sylvia Plath about mirrors and masks. He asked what I thought it meant to lose yourself in someone else's reflection. I said I wasn't sure. He smiled. You will be. When I left that afternoon, the hallway was empty. My footsteps echoed all the way to the lockers. Through the window at the end of the hall, I saw the other students pouring out of the gym, laughing, shoving each other through the snow. No one saw me leave room 203. That Thursday, the door was locked again. We sat closer than usual. He read part of my poem aloud, nodding at the imagery. You're starting to understand intimacy, he said. Most adults never get there. I wanted to believe him. I wanted so badly to be good, exceptional. But something inside me was beginning to turn. Small things, like how I'd once loved the quiet of that room, and now it pressed against me. Or how his compliments no longer felt light, they hung in the air like steam clinging to my skin. I stopped telling Dorothy what we talked about. I stopped writing about stars. I started writing about silence, and walls, and locked doors. One evening, after he praised another one of my metaphors, I stood to leave, but hesitated. He looked up. You all right, Edith? I nodded, then shook my head. I think I should go. My mom, she trusts you, he said gently. She knows where you are. With me. He stood, walked over slowly, then placed a hand on my shoulder again. You don't need to be afraid here. I wanted to leave. But when he smiled, I stayed. He promised I'd get into any college I wanted. All I had to do was trust him. It was February, and the cold had deepened in Millgrove. The sky remained low and gray for days at a time, like a wet wool blanket draped over the town. Snow curled at the edges of windows, clinging to the glass like frost-bitten lace. Inside room 203, the radiator clanked and hissed as if in protest. But Mr. Elliot said the cold made us sharper. Nothing grows when we're too comfortable, he told me once, pulling his chair closer. That day, I brought him a new essay. It was about solitude and silence, and how some people mistake one for the other. I'd worked on it for 3 nights while my mother coughed in the next room. I barely slept, but the words came easily. Too easily, maybe. He read the first paragraph aloud, then set the paper down and looked at me with an intensity that made my shoulders tense. This, he said, tapping the corner of the page, is Ivy League material. I blinked. You think so? I know so. He leaned forward. I have a friend at Princeton. If we polish this a little more, I can send it his way. You'll need a scholarship, of course, but with writing like this, my heart pounded. He smiled. You see, Edith, you're not like the others. I've taught for years many bright kids, but none like you. This is why we meet like this. To nurture what others overlook. I nodded slowly. He continued. But you must understand what we're doing here. It's different. Unique. My methods aren't conventional. Some might not understand. That's why it's important we keep it between us. Our work, our sessions, it's our secret garden. My stomach flipped. Do you trust me? He asked. I nodded again, this time slower. Yes. His fingers brushed mine as he handed the essay back. They lingered. Longer than necessary. Later that week, Dorothy invited me to the winter fair. It's just silly fun, she said. Cotton candy, snow boots, bad music. Come on, you could use a night off. I hesitated. I have a session. Dorothy frowned. You always have a session. I'm working on something important. She looked at me long and quiet, then shrugged. Suit yourself. She didn't ask again. At home, Mama had started to notice the late evenings, the dark circles under my eyes, the way I barely touched dinner. You're always tired, sweetheart, she said, stirring a pot of soup with her scarf wrapped around her shoulders. And you don't smile as much anymore. I'm just focused, I said. Focused on what? I hesitated. Writing. She smiled softly. You always did love your words. Just don't forget to rest, or laugh, or be 14. I kissed her cheek, but I didn't answer. That night, I dreamed of heavy doors and echoing footsteps. I woke before dawn, the room still dark, heart racing. On Thursday, I brought another draft. We sat closer than before. He leaned in to mark a sentence, then let his hand rest lightly on my back. You're almost there, he said. All I need is your full trust. I nodded, but something inside me recoiled. The contact lingered, not firm, but present, quiet and sure. And my breath caught not from excitement, but from something I couldn't name. He talked then about how writers were often lonely. It's the price of genius, he said. But you have me. When I got home, Mama had fallen asleep on the couch with a cough drop stuck to her sleeve. I covered her with a quilt and sat beside her in the dark. She stirred. Home already, she murmured. I nodded. She turned toward me, eyes heavy. Why do you look so serious all the time, Edith? You used to hum when you walked through the door. I didn't answer, because I didn't know. Was I being shaped into someone great, or carved into something I'd never recognize? I found it under a pile of sheet music in the supply closet. A leather journal worn at the edges. Mr. Elliot had asked me to fetch some extra chalkboard erasers. The janitor kept them in the small closet tucked behind room 203, mostly used for broken chairs, dusty sheet music, and boxes of retired textbooks. He handed me the key like it was nothing, and I went alone, humming to myself under my breath. The hallway was quiet. Spring break was coming, and most students had already started their vacations early. The air carried the smell of rain through the open windows. I pushed the closet door open and flicked on the light. It blinked once, then settled into a dim, humming glow. I reached up to the top shelf for the erasers and knocked over a stack of faded hymnals. They thudded to the floor in a soft cloud of dust. That's when I saw it. A black, leather-bound journal wedged between a box labeled Recorders, 1947, and a pile of folded sheet music. It looked old, but cared for edges worn smooth, the leather soft from use. No label, no name. I pulled it out carefully and flipped it open. The first page held a list of names in neat cursive. Jenny Wilkes, Beatrice Monroe, Carla Jennings. Each name had a set of dates beside it, Tuesdays and Thursdays mostly. Times, notes. My fingers went cold. I flipped forward. There were pages for each girl. Jenny said, excellent writing skills, needs affirmation, vulnerable when praised, progressing as hoped. Beatrice's easily isolated seeks validation. Avoid discussion of home life. And then I found mine. Edith Moore, 9th grade, highly suggestible, deep emotional connection forming. Continue exposure sessions twice weekly. Monitor boundary awareness. My heart pounded so hard I thought the walls might hear it. Exposure sessions. Monitor boundaries. My own handwriting had never felt so distant, so foreign. I closed the journal slowly, hands trembling. I shouldn't have seen this. I knew that. But something in me, a quiet piece, still trying to be brave, kept me frozen. I heard footsteps. Quick, steady, getting closer. I panicked and slid the journal back under the sheet music, stacking the hymnals over it again. I turned off the light and stepped out just as Mr. Elliot reached the doorway. He looked surprised to see me already outside. Did you find the erasers? He asked, tone even. I nodded too fast. Yes, they were right on top. His eyes lingered on me for a moment longer than necessary. Then he opened the closet and stepped inside. From where I stood, I could see his posture change. His hand reached automatically to the sheet music. He moved it aside. He turned, and for the first time since I'd met him, His face was not kind, not warm. It was flat, cold, watchful. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I clutched the erasers to my chest like they were armor. He stepped forward slowly and closed the closet door behind him. The click of the latch made me flinch. "Sometimes," he said, voice soft again, "students misunderstand the nature of mentorship, of trust." I stared at him. "I never meant to hurt you, Edith," he said. But I no longer believed him. Not when I knew I wasn't the first. Not when I'd read how he studied us like subjects our weaknesses scribbled in ink behind locked doors. I didn't speak. I just turned and walked away, down the hallway, past the bulletin board with spring break announcements, past the trophy case. When I reached the front steps of the school, I sat down and watched the rain come down in long silver strands. That was the last time I ever felt like a student. After that day, I never told a soul. But the silence sank into my bones like cold rain. The house was quiet, as it always was this time of evening. The sky outside had turned the color of steel wool, and the wind moved the branches in slow, sweeping arcs against the windows. A kettle hissed softly on the stove, and the scent of lemon ginger filled the kitchen. I stood at the counter, watching the light fade across the yard. I could see the garden Jacob had helped me build last spring, now just rows of brittle stems waiting for warmth. My tea steeped in the mug while I opened the middle drawer beneath the counter. It stuck as always, then gave way with a groan. Inside, among old grocery lists and rubber bands, sat a notebook. Thin, blue, faded at the spine. I hadn't opened it in years. It wasn't his notebook, not the one I found that day. It was mine. I carried it home after everything. After I stopped going to room 203. After I told my mother I preferred to study alone. She didn't ask many questions. Her cough had worsened, and I think part of her was just glad I was still reading, still writing, still home. But the notebook remained. I sat down at the kitchen table, tea untouched, and opened it slowly. The first name was Jenny Wilkes, then Beatrice Monroe, then Carla Jennings. I'd written them the day after the closet. I couldn't keep the real journal, but I could remember. I didn't want to forget. On the next page, I had written notes not like his, but in my own hand, softer, unsure. Jenny always wore braids, kind, shy smile. Beatrice, good at spelling, always waited for others to speak. Carla, transferred mid-year, didn't come back after February. Then the pages went blank. I never had the courage to fill in more. A buzzing on the counter pulled me back, my cell phone lighting up with Jacob's name. I pressed the speaker button and leaned back. "Hi, sweetheart." "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice warm. "Just checking in. How's your day?" "Oh, slow. Gray skies, tea and memories." There was a pause. "You sound, I don't know, distant." "I'm just remembering a time I didn't want to remember." Another pause. Then gently, "Want to talk about it." I looked at the notebook. "Not yet," I said, "but I might, soon." "Well, I'm here, whenever you're ready." "I know," I whispered. "Thank you." After we hung up, I sat there for a while longer, the tea gone lukewarm. Then I flipped to the last blank page. I picked up the pen, an old ballpoint that had survived moves and floods and years of forgetting, and wrote one final name, Edith May Harper. I stared at it, then underlined it. Outside, the rain began to fall. Soft, steady. A sound I'd always found comforting. I stood and moved toward the porch. The screen door creaked, and the evening breeze kissed my face, cool and damp. I sat in the old rocking chair. The porch light glowed behind me, casting a soft amber on the notebook resting on my lap. For years, I had believed I was the only one, but I wasn't. And maybe, just maybe, I'd be the first to speak. Before I left the house, I folded the list and tucked it into my coat pocket. The morning air smelled of rain and warming earth. Spring had finally begun to loosen winter's grip on Milton Gap, coaxing tiny buds from the branches and streaks of green from the soil. I stood in front of the hallway mirror, brushing down the sleeves of a soft beige coat. It used to be lighter in color, closer to cream, but years and weather had given it a muted tone, like parchment left in the sun. I'd bought it when I was 16. It still fit barely. The radio played something old and familiar from the kitchen, a waltz that used to drift through dances I never attended. On the table by the door sat the notebook, the one I had written in decades ago and again just last week. Beside it, a smaller slip of paper, folded in thirds, creased carefully. My handwriting, small and deliberate, lined the page. Jenny, Beatrice, Carla, Marianne, Edith. 5 names that I could remember. That mattered. I picked it up, held it for a moment in my palm, then slid it into the coat's inner pocket. I felt the edge press against my chest when I moved. Not heavy, but solid. I turned to the door, then stopped, and went back to the table. I pulled out a small note card, the kind you find in floral boxes at pharmacies, and wrote a few lines. If I don't say it now, it stays forever. So I will say it, even if I shake, even if no one listens. I didn't sign it. It wasn't meant for anyone else, just me. The bus station sat 10 minutes from my house. Jacob insisted on driving me, even though I told him he didn't need to. He waited by the car while I double-checked my bag. When I finally stepped outside, he opened the passenger door and gave me that sideways grin of his. "You sure about this?" he asked. "No," I said, "but I'm going." He didn't push further. Instead, he helped me in and turned the heater up a notch. Halfway there, he asked gently, "What do you want to say to them?" I looked out the window. The trees were just beginning to wake up, little puffs of white and pink blooming on their tips. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I'll say something." The station was quiet. A few travelers hunched over phones or coffee's jackets pulled close against the breeze. Dorothy had called the night before. Her voice was raspy, familiar with that same spark I remembered from 9th grade. "You're really coming?" she'd asked. "I think it's time. I'll save you a seat." Now, as I stepped off the curb and onto the platform, I felt that slip of paper shift in my coat pocket. I pressed my palm to it. It was still there. The weight of it wasn't in the paper, it was in the memory, in the knowing. The bus arrived right on time, white and blue, a little faded, with a door that wheezed open like it was exhaling. Jacob carried my small suitcase on board, then kissed the top of my head. "You'll be okay," he said. I know I said, though my voice was barely a whisper. I chose a seat by the window. Outside, Jacob waved once before turning back toward the parking lot. I looked down at the seat beside me. My hands rested on my lap. They trembled, but not from age, from the anticipation of words long held. By sunset, I'd be back in the building where my voice was first taken. Maybe I'd find it again. The engine roared softly beneath me as the bus pulled away. The notebook nestled deep in my travel bag shifted just slightly, and a gust of wind outside flipped the last page open. The school hadn't changed much. The bricks were still chipped at the edges, just like my memory. Millgrove High stood at the edge of town like a time capsule no one had quite gotten around to opening. The trees out front had grown taller, fuller, but their roots still broke the sidewalk in the same crooked lines I remembered stepping over as a girl. I climbed the 3 steps slowly, my knees stiff but steady. The front doors groaned as they opened, letting out the familiar scent of old varnish paper and something that always reminded me of chalk dust and nervous hopes. Inside the hallway had been repainted a softer cream. New trophies filled the cases, but the linoleum floors still squeaked, and the echoes of long-ago bells still seemed to hum faintly in the walls. Dorothy met me just outside the auditorium. Her hair, now completely white, was pulled back with a green clip that looked like one she might have worn at 14. "You came?" she said, voice low. "I did." We looked at each other for a moment. Then she smiled, and so did I. The doors opened, and we stepped inside. Rows of folding wooden chairs lined the auditorium, each with a name tag attached to the back. A long table in the front held plates of cookies, bowls of hard candy, and 2 steaming urns, one labeled tea, the other decaf only. The stage was lit with soft amber lights, the curtains drawn back. Above it hung a banner, Millgrove High Reunion, Class of '58 and Friends. Someone had typed up tiny bios for each alum. I saw mine tucked neatly beside a cup of lemon tea. It read, Edith May Harper, retired librarian, grandmother of 4, lover of poetry and pie. It made me smile. Small, clean, almost true. As people filtered in, I heard laughter, gentle gasps of recognition, and the cautious warmth of old classmates becoming familiar again. Some faces I remembered instantly. Others needed name tags. They came to greet me. Some hugged, some held hands a little too long, unsure of what to say, but grateful I was there. They asked about my family, my life in Georgia. One woman brought up the time we sang the Star-Spangled Banner at the town fair, but no one mentioned Mr. Elliot, not until the microphone crackled. The master of ceremonies was a sprightly man named Harold, who once played trumpet in the marching band. He tapped the mic, smiled wide, and launched into a list of honored educators who made Millgrove what it was. There was polite applause for Mrs. Thompson, who taught home economics. A cheer for Mr. DeWitt, the old basketball coach. Then, and of course, we remember Mr. Bernard Elliott, whose passion for literature and student success left a mark on so many. A beat of silence, then applause. Short, hesitant, but real. I sat frozen. The name hit my chest like a stone dropped in deep water. Around me, eyes flicked in my direction, then looked away just as fast. Dorothy sat down beside me. Her hand, dry and sure, found mine and gave it a squeeze. "Are you going to say something?" she whispered. "I don't know," I whispered back. "But if not now, when?" I reached into my coat pocket. The paper was still there, folded into thirds. The ink soft from time the edges slightly curled. My hand trembled as I pulled it out. Not from age, from the weight of it, from knowing what it meant to finally stop carrying it alone. The spotlight on the stage didn't warm the room. It only brightened the stillness. They gave him applause. I gave him silence, but one of us was wrong. "I'd like to share a memory," I said, and the whole room went still. The microphone had been left on the stand after Harold's final thank you, his voice still echoing faintly in the back of the auditorium. Most of the crowd had returned to their seats, clutching teacups or nibbling shortbread, their conversations quiet but content. And then I stood. My knees wobbled, not from nerves, not from age, but from the weight of what I carried in my coat pocket. Dorothy looked up at me. Her eyes didn't ask, they only steadied. I stepped out into the center aisle, the folded paper crinkling softly in my palm. I didn't need to open it. I knew every name by heart. The soft creak of my shoes echoed against the old wooden floors as I approached the front. I didn't climb onto the stage. I stopped just beneath it in front of the first row. The microphone picked up my breath. "I'd like to share a memory," I repeated, and the teacups stopped clinking. The murmurings faded. The lights above warmed my shoulders. I was 14, I began, and I loved books more than I loved most people. A chuckle escaped from somewhere in the back. I was quiet, small, eager to please. One teacher noticed. He told me I was different, that I had potential, that I was brilliant. My voice didn't tremble. He kept me after school to help me, to encourage me, to teach me more than the curriculum allowed. I let that sit a moment. He said I was the only one. The paper in my hand curled tighter. But later, I learned I wasn't. The lights seemed to shift then. The silence became denser, as though everyone in that room had begun to hold their breath. There was another girl, before me, and another before her. I looked toward the back, where a young mother was bouncing a baby on her shoulder. Her eyes met mine. He locked the door when he taught me, told me not to tell anyone, that the best students needed special lessons. I paused. I never told anyone. My voice caught, but I didn't let it break. For 70 years, Dorothy was standing now, a hand on the back of my chair, steady as ever. I'm not here to accuse. I'm not here to relive pain. I looked across the faces lined with age, framed with hair now silver or gone. Some furrowed brows, some frozen in recognition. I'm here to tell the truth. Not for him, but for the girl I was. For the girls who came after. A tear slipped down my cheek. I let it fall. I don't need apologies. I don't need shock. I just need this said out loud. I turned, slightly facing the back wall. If it happened to you too, I said slowly, I see you. One woman let out a quiet sob. A man shifted in his seat, wiping his eyes. I carried this for so long. I thought it was mine alone, I said. But now I know silence only feeds the lie that we are alone. My fingers unfurled the paper. 5 names. I read them one by one, and when I finished, I folded it gently, placed it on the edge of the stage, and stepped back. The auditorium didn't erupt. It didn't cheer. It didn't gasp. It simply held its breath with me. Then Dorothy moved. She walked down the aisle, took my hand, and stood beside me. Behind her, another woman stood, and then another. No one said a word, but in that quiet, I heard something I hadn't in decades. My own voice, steady and whole. Her name was Carla, and she walked up to me with tears already in her eyes. The auditorium had slowly emptied, conversation swelling in small clusters like puddles after a soft spring rain. Plates of shortbread had been reduced to crumbs, the urns of tea slowly cooled, and someone had turned off half the lights, leaving the room bathed in a kind golden hue. I stood near the edge of the refreshment table, unsure whether I should sit down or simply leave. The weight of what I had just said pressed gently against my shoulders, not crushing, but humming like a long-held breath finally released. Then Carla came forward. She had silver hair curled close to her face and wore a scarf dotted with blue flowers. Her shoes made no sound as she crossed the floor. I'm Carla, she said. Carla Mayford. I was class of 57, 1 year before you. My breath caught. The name. The journal. I remember, I said. She nodded, and for a second neither of us spoke. Then she reached for my hand. I always thought I imagined it, that I'd misunderstood, she said. But then I heard your voice, and suddenly I remembered everything clearly. The notebook, the Thursdays, the locked door. She wiped her cheek quickly, not out of shame, but of something like release. I never told a soul, until now. Her grip tightened. Thank you, she whispered. Behind her, another woman approached quietly, her gaze low. I was in his sophomore lit class, she said. He said my writing had soul. I didn't think anyone else knew he'd ever said that. Her name was Beatrice. I had read it in the journal once and then tried to forget. Others didn't step forward, but their eyes said enough. Glances lingered. Nods came slowly. The air had shifted like something invisible had cracked and let the light in. Dorothy found me, arms crossed, lips pressed in a firm line. I owe you something, she said, her voice thick. Back then, I wondered more than once. I saw the way he looked at you, but I was afraid. She hesitated. I should have asked, should have said something. I'm sorry, Edith. I looked into her eyes, still as sharp and steady as ever, and reached for her hand. We were children, I said. So were we all. She pulled me into a hug, strong and warm. Outside the windows, the sky had slipped into peach and lavender. The courtyard was lit with the last fingers of sunlight. Crickets began their song in the far grass. Someone rang the old school bell once, perhaps as a joke, but it echoed through the hallways with a strange tenderness. Carla turned toward it. It doesn't sound the same, she said, half smiling. No, I agreed. It sounds lighter. We stood there, 3 women once called girls. 3 voices once tucked away into corners, now standing in open light. More people came and went, offering quiet glances or gentle words. No one asked for details. No one pushed. It was enough to have the names, the recognition, the moment. And I knew then that this reunion had not just been for reconnecting old classmates. It had been for remembering ourselves. I wasn't alone, I thought. I never had been. I just needed time and courage to remember. Back in Milton Gap, I told Jacob everything. Not all at once. Not in a grand confession, but in the quiet rhythm of the kitchen as soup simmered and sunlight spilled through the windows like warm honey. It was a Tuesday. The kind where the birds didn't stop singing all morning and the air smelled faintly of lilac from the bush outside my porch. Jacob was stirring the pot, wooden spoon in hand. I sat at the small table by the window needles, clicking gently as I worked the last rows of a scarf I'd started weeks ago and nearly forgotten. I watched the yarn stretch between my fingers. There's something I want to tell you, I said. He didn't turn around immediately, just paused like he already knew. I took a breath. For most of my life, I said I thought forgetting was the only way to move on. But I was wrong. He turned the heat down on the stove and sat across from me, hands folded on the table. He didn't interrupt. He never did. So I told him about the teacher, the notebook, the days after school, the names, and the silence that grew so large it nearly replaced the sound of my own voice. He didn't say a word while I spoke, just watched me, eyes, gentle brows, low in thought. At one point, he reached across the table and held my hand. When I finished, he gave it a soft squeeze. You've carried that alone all this time, he asked. I nodded, but not anymore. I reached into the drawer beneath the table and took out the little leather-bound notebook. Not the one he might have expected, the dark book with dates and teacher's notes. This was mine. It's not for the past, I said. It's for understanding. For knowing who your mother really is. He opened it slowly. The pages were lined with names, thoughts, fragments of memory that had floated in and out of my dreams for years. Some names were bold, others faint. Some had question marks beside them, not because I doubted, but because memory sometimes fogs at the edges. He traced a name with his finger. Jenny Wilkes, he read aloud. She was the first I knew of, I said. Maybe not the first. He closed the book gently and looked out the window. Do you think she's still alive? He asked. I don't know, I said. But if she is, I'd like to thank her. Thank her for being the first to carry something no girl should carry alone. For making space without knowing it for someone like me to speak years later. Jacob leaned back in his chair, eyes still on the garden outside. I can look her up, he offered. See if there's any way to find her. Maybe, I said. Or maybe she's watching the birds right now in a kitchen like this, wondering if anyone remembers. He smiled. You remembered. Yes, I said, and I'll keep remembering." He got up to serve the soup, setting 2 bowls on the table. Outside, the mail carrier waved as he passed. The wind nudged the chimes gently, and a bluebird landed on the porch rail. The scarf I'd been knitting lay folded in my lap, the last few stitches still dangling from the needle. As Jacob sat down again, I said one last thing. "Maybe memory isn't meant to be perfect," I said softly. "Maybe it's meant to be shared." And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt light. I never said his name again, not in anger, not in fear. Just silence. And that was enough. The morning came softly. A breeze through the curtains, sunlight warming the wooden floor, the faint sound of birds waking the world one chirp at a time. I sat at the little desk by the window, steam curling from my mug of chamomile tea, and opened a fresh piece of stationery. Pale blue with a border of forget-me-nots. Fitting, I thought. Jacob had come by earlier. He didn't stay long, just long enough to set down a small plate of oatmeal cookies and kiss the top of my head. "Write what you need to write," he'd said. Now, with the pen in my hand and the house still and quiet, I did. "Dear Edith," I wrote. Not the Edith I was now with silver hair and soft hands. The Edith from 70 years ago. The girl who sat 2 seats from the window. The girl who thought kindness came in the shape of praise and attention. The girl who didn't know how to say no. "You don't need to forgive anyone," I wrote slowly, the words, careful, steady. "You only need to forgive yourself for not knowing how to protect yourself from something no child should have to see coming." I paused, blinking back the pressure behind my eyes. I wasn't crying. Not really. Just breathing deeper than I had in years. "You were never weak," I continued. "You were made to feel small. That's not the same thing." I looked over at the photograph on the table, me holding baby Jacob, my mother beside us with flour on her cheek from baking. I traced the edge of the frame with one finger, then turned back to the letter. "And you were special," I wrote. "But not because of what he saw in you, because of what you carried and survived, even when no one knew." I folded the letter slowly and slid it into the old notebook, the one with the names, the one I'd almost burned twice in the years after graduation, but never could. I tucked the letter between 2 blank pages, a space for others maybe, or a space for nothing. I didn't need to know which. I stood and walked to the porch, the notebook pressed gently against my chest. Outside, the sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows across the porch swing, and the little ceramic frog Jacob had made in 3rd grade still holding its cracked umbrella. I sat down and opened the notebook one last time. The wind, soft and certain, turned the final page, and I let it. I leaned back, eyes closed, letting the warmth of the morning settle into my bones. No courtrooms, no headlines, just this moment, just peace. He never taught me that. That was the last lesson, the one I gave myself. I was special, not because of what he saw in me, but because I finally saw myself, and for the first time in decades, I laughed, softly. The kind of laugh that starts in your belly and rises like a bird, free and small and completely real. Somewhere in that quiet breeze, I felt her the girl I used to be, and I let her go. I never spoke his name again, not out of fear, not out of hate, just out of choice. And maybe that's what healing truly is, not erasing the past, but giving it a place that doesn't define your future. I wrote a letter to the girl I used to be. I didn't promise her justice or closure. I promised her kindness. Because after everything, that's what we all deserve. No matter how long it takes the voice you thought you lost, it's still inside you. waiting, hoping, whole. If this story brought back a memory or helped you feel seen, please share it with someone who may need to hear it too. And if you feel ready, leave a comment. Tell us what you would say to your younger self. We're listening.